Welcome to Are You Chemistry GCSE Ready? This playlist takes you through loads of example questions and guided solutions for every single topic in your chemistry GCSE. So it's a perfect way for you to test your chemistry knowledge. If you feel like you need a quick review or you just want the ideal revision companion for these videos, then make sure to download my free chemistry GCSE revision notes. I've linked them in the description below. Or if you're ready, let's dive straight in.
Okay, let's answer some questions about covalent bonding. So remember, covalent bonding and ionic bonding are different. In covalent bonding, you have your electrons involved in it, this is my first question, being shared, whereas in ionic bonding, they get transferred, those electrons. So there's the first difference. So they're shared. Then the second piece of information you must write down in your exam about covalent bonding is that in particular, they are shared in pairs, these electrons. So don't miss that second part out. Okay, how do we start to work out how many electrons are involved in the bonding? So what you need to do is you need to know how many electrons your atom will need to complete its outer shell. Okay, and how do you do that? Well, remember we need to use my periodic table and specifically looking at what group I'm in. So for example, how many electrons would a carbon atom need? Well, if I have a little look in my periodic table, I find that carbon is in period 2, so it's got 2 occupied shells. So the first shell will have 2 electrons in it, and then the second shell has, well, it's in group 4, which tells me there are 4 electrons in its second shell, its outer shell. And that shell can hold up to 8 electrons. So it needs 4 more, basically. 8 minus the 4 that it has, it's going to need 4 more to have a full outer shell. Okay, now let's use that idea to try and do some covalent formula. So work out the formula of nitrogen fluoride. Okay, so we are going to be made up of some nitrogen atoms and some fluorine as well. So nitrogen is in group 5 and period 2, and fluorine is in group 7 and period 2. Since they're both in period 2, what that tells me is in order for them to have a full outer shell, they can fit 8 electrons in that outer shell. So I guess the question is, how many electrons do they have already in their outer shells? So your nitrogen, because it's in group 5, has 5 electrons in its outer shell, which means that it's going to need 3 more to make that outer shell full. And fluorine is in group 7, so it has 7 electrons in its outer shell, and it's going to need 1 more to make that outer shell full. Now, since fluorine only needs 1 more electron to make its outer shell full, but your nitrogen actually needs 3, what that means is that I'm going to need 3 of my fluorine atoms to react with 1 nitrogen atom so that they can share that appropriate amount of electrons. So you get for nitrogen fluoride NF3, 1 nitrogen, 3 fluorine. Okay, work out the formula of hydrogen sulfide. Okay, so we have got here your hydrogen is in group 1 and is in period 1, and your sulfur is in group 6 and period 2. So if we look first at your sulfur, it's in group 6 and period 2. So because it's in period 2, that means that it can fit 8 electrons in its outer shell. Whereas your hydrogen's actually in period 1, which means it only has 1 shell, its first shell, so it can only fit 2 electrons in its outer shell. So since hydrogen has 1 electron in its outer shell but can fit 2, it needs another 1 electron, and since sulfur has 6 electrons in its outer shell but can fit 8, it needs another 2 electrons. So to make that balance, what that means is 1 sulfur reacts with 2 hydrogen atoms. So for hydrogen sulfide, I have the formula H2, 2 hydrogen, S, 1 sulfur. Okay, let's have a go at representing this covalent bonding in dot and cross diagrams. So draw a dot and cross diagram for ammonia, and we've been given the formula there, NH3. So N, your nitrogen, is in group 5 and period 2, and H, your hydrogen, is in group 1, period 1. So that tells me that my nitrogen needs 3 more electrons to fill that outer shell. It's in group 5, it has 5, but could have 8, so needs 3 more. And my hydrogen only needs 1 more electron. It's in group 1, but because it's in period 1, in order to have a full outer shell, it only needs 2 electrons in that shell. So it just needs 1 more electron. So in order for that to happen, what you're going to have is you're going to have 1 nitrogen, and then you're going to have 3 hydrogen. And to be honest, that information's kind of already given to you in the formula of ammonia, NH3. So my next step here is to put in my shared electrons into the overlaps. So they're shared in pairs, and you just need to remember which electrons you're representing dots with and which electrons you're representing crosses with. So for me here, I am going to represent the electrons from hydrogen as crosses and from nitrogen as dots. So my first job is to give them all in those overlaps a shared pair of electrons, 1 dot, 1 cross each. Okay, and then if I look at my hydrogen, now that they're sharing, each of those hydrogen is sharing 1 electron from the nitrogen, they have actually got their 2 electrons. They have all got full outer shells. And if I think back to my nitrogen now, what I need to appreciate is because originally it's in group 5, it originally has therefore 5 electrons. There should be 5 dots somewhere on my picture. And I currently have 3 dots, the 3 electrons that it's sharing with those 3 hydrogen. So I need to add another 2 dots, so I can add them there. And I need to make sure that they're not in the overlapping sections, because those aren't electrons that are being involved in this sharing. Okay, and then just as a quick check afterwards to make sure everything's okay, my nitrogen is there, good, with a full outer shell because it has now got 8 electrons, good. All of my hydrogens have got 2 electrons, so they all have full outer shells, good. And then each of my hydrogens only has 1 of its own electrons, those are the crosses, and my nitrogen has 5 of its own electrons. Because it's in group 5, those are the dots on my diagram. So that was just a quick check that this is 100% correct for my dot and cross. Okay, time to do another dot and cross diagram. So this time we've got it for nitrogen. So first thing to remember, I suppose, is that nitrogen is a diatomic molecule. And you do need to remember which molecules you have that are diatomic, and you have that mnemonic to help you. Have no fear of ice cold beer. Okay, so if you're not sure, do go back to the notes and make sure you memorize those. Okay, fine. So we're dealing with nitrogen. It's diatomic, it's in period 2, and it's in group 5. So since it's in group 5 and period 2, it needs 8 electrons to have a full outer shell, has 5 electrons currently, so needs 3 more. Diatomic, so I can draw quite comfortably that there are 2 nitrogen here, and I've got that overlap in the middle. And I need to put my shared electrons in the overlap first. So they both need 3 more than what they've got. So they're going to share 3 each. So I've got 3 dots and 3 crosses, okay? Where dots are for one of these 2 nitrogen atoms and the crosses are for the other. So good. They've got 3 each being shared, and now I have to add in my remaining electrons here. So remember they're in group 5, each of them therefore has 5 electrons in total. So if I look at my right hand side here and I give those crosses for my electrons, and I've got 1, 2, 3 in the shared crosses, and so I need 2 more crosses, And the same for the other on the left hand side. I've got 1, 2, 3 dots, so I need another 2 dots that aren't being shared so that they both have those original 5 electrons. Okay, and then just make sure that this is 100% correct. So am I done? If I look at one individual nitrogen here, I'm looking at the one on the right hand side, it's got 2 crosses, okay, that aren't being shared, and in its shared, it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 mixture of dots and crosses. So that's a total of 8 electrons, so it has a full outer shell, and the same for my left hand side as well. So that's just to check that I've done this correctly.
Just before we go into the tips and tricks section, if you do want some extra advice to getting that grade 9 for your GCSE, then why not download my free 20-minute exam success guide? Just click on the link in the description below. I'm going to give away all of my best advice and secrets, and completely for free, so why not?
Okay, tips and tricks for this section. So I guess first thing is to remember that covalent bonding always involves shared pairs of electrons. So when you're drawing your overlaps as well, there should be an equal number of dots and crosses in those overlaps to show those electrons are being shared in pairs. Don't focus on making your dot and cross diagram into works of art. It really doesn't matter. You don't need perfect circles. Your overall shape just isn't that important. All you need to make sure is that you are showing that these atoms are connected in the correct way, okay, and that you are showing which electrons are in the overlap section and which electrons are not in the overlap section, and that you keep track of which electrons are dots and which electrons are crosses. And you choose that convention, whichever you want to have the dots and whichever you want to have the crosses, but make sure for a particular diagram you're careful with those.